Books of the Bible, summarized. Starting with the Old Testament. The book of Genesis, fully summarized. In the beginning there was nothing but an empty void, and also a bunch of water somehow. But then about 6,000 years ago, probably, the eternal Spirit of God said, "Let there be light," and there was. Then he created the day and the night, the sea, the land, and the heavens, the plants, the sun, the moon, and the stars, and the birds and fish, and the land-dwelling animals, and then he made the creature of man in his own image, who would have dominion over all of nature. And he did all this in 6 days, and everything was perfect. Then on the 7th day, when the heavens and the earth were completed, God rested, despite being an all-powerful deity because reasons, and he blessed the 7th day forever. But all that was actually a lie, because God created man before any other creature out of dust and his breath. God grew a garden in Eden, with a great river running through it, and made everything there pleasant to eat, and had man tend to the garden. And he also put there the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil there, for good measure, but told man not to eat of their fruit. Man then named all of the animals that God brought to him, but none were suitable companions for him. So God created a woman out of man's ribcage, and they were both naked, but felt no shame with one another. The man's name was Adam, and the woman's name was Eve. However, there was a crafty serpent in the garden who tricked Eve into eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which God had told them not to do, or they would die within a day, promising that she would be like God if she did. She then gave some of the fruit to Adam, and the first wisdom they gained was being ashamed of their bodies. I'm sure this story won't contain any negative implications at all. So they both clothed themselves with fig leaves and hid from God. Then God called out to them in the garden, and despite being omniscient, struggled to ascertain their location. He grilled them about eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and he cursed the serpent with leglessness and 3 square meals a day of dust for its deception. And he cursed Eve to have pains with childbirth and subservience to man for eating the first fruit, and cursed Adam to toil in hard labor and die eventually for his horrible crime of acknowledging women's opinions. And he gave them some clothes to cover their disgusting bodies. Then, because God feared that man would eat of the fruit of eternal life in the garden and become like God, he cast them out of the garden forever, and he placed a cherubim with a flaming sword to guard the garden against man. I guess the serpent wasn't wrong when he called God a lying skank. Adam and Eve didn't immediately die after eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and instead Adam started knocking Eve up, and she had 2 sons from him, Cain and Abel. And they both offered sacrifice to God, but God didn't like Cain's fruit salad sacrifice because he wasn't a vegan soy boy cuck, but respected Abel's meat lover's sacrifice. So Cain became jealous and killed his brother like the triggered snowflake he was. God was angry and banished Cain to a horrible life, but put a mark on him, alerting the people living on earth that didn't exist yet that they were not to kill Cain. And despite there not being any people in the world at this point, Cain had a wife and a son named Enoch, who built an entire city from the ground up while Cain was just chilling out in the land of Nod. Enoch had a lot of descendants, and Adam's wife gave birth to a new son called Seth. Then the Bible goes through Adam's genealogy all the way to Noah, and everyone lives hundreds of years old for some reason, with Adam himself living for 930 years in total. Holy cow, eating that fruit did the exact opposite of what God said it would. It didn't shorten Adam's life, it extended it. Or maybe, I don't know, human DNA was pure back then or something. Methuselah actually holds the world record for years alive, with him living a full 969 years. Eat your heart out, Gene Calment. Man then came to multiply over the earth, and apparently there were giants in those days. But man became violent and wicked, and God sensed that everyone was thinking violent thoughts in their head all the time, continually, even babies, evil babies, except a 500-year-old man named Noah that God thought was a pretty chill dude. So God, fed up with humanity, decided to flood the earth and kill every single person and animal. Can't risk leaving those evil babies and evil puppies alive. But he instructed Noah to build an ark made of gopher wood, and take himself, his wife, his sons, and their wives, and 2 of every animal, as well as 7 pairs of every clean animal, and 7 pairs of birds on it to survive. So Noah heeded his commands, and this nearly 600-year-old man somehow constructed a wooden boat that was able to hold together, that was larger than the largest wooden boats ever constructed in history, and somehow packed every single animal on Earth 2 by 2 onto the boat with enough food and water and adequate medical care for all of them to survive God's purge of every living thing on the face of the earth. God sent the flood waters, which covered all the land on Earth and killed every living thing on it. Did I mention every living thing was killed? Because the Bible sure mentions it a lot. The earth flooded for 40 days, with the waters reaching the tallest mountains, even though there really wouldn't be enough water on Earth to do that, but whatever. And the earth stayed flooded for a full 150 days. The waters then subsided from the earth, which Noah knew because he sent out a dove and it brought him back an olive leaf. The ark landed in the mountains of Ararat, and so, on God's command, Noah, his family, and his animals went back on a dry land, and somehow they all managed to survive despite all the plant life having been wiped out by the flood. After Noah sacrificed some of the animals to God, God made a covenant with him not to destroy the entire world again through a flood. What a nice guy. God commanded Noah to be fruitful and multiply, and proclaimed that any man who sheds another man's blood would have their blood shed in turn. He also announced that he was taking back the rainbow from the homos, and it would be a sign of his covenant with Noah. Then Noah planted a vineyard in soil that was previously thousands of feet under water, and got drunk, and then his son Ham saw him naked in his tent. Noah was super embarrassed, so he decided that punishment was in order. Not for Ham, though. He decides to curse Ham's son, Canaan, and his descendants to be servile to the descendants of Noah's other 2 sons, because in the Bible, children are punished for the sins of their parents. Then an entire chapter is dedicated to listing all of Noah's descendants and what nations they became. In those days, everyone on Earth spoke the same language, despite there being well-documented evidence of multiple languages existing at this time the story supposedly takes place. Some people in Shinar gathered together to create a great Tower of Babel to reach the heavens so that they could be remembered. But God was displeased, and he scrambled their languages and cast them all over the earth so that they could not continue building. Then the Bible lists Shem's descendants all the way to Abram, and everyone is still living hundreds of years old somehow, with Shem living for 600 years. Abram and his family came to Haran, with God telling him that he would bless those that bless him and curse those that curse him. And so God told Abram to leave and go to Canaan, and he promised to give Abram's descendants the land there. However, there was a famine in the land, so Abram went up to Egypt and pretended that his wife Sarai was his sister so Pharaoh wouldn't kill him and take her for himself because she was quite fetching. Technically it wasn't a total lie, as his wife Sarai was his half-sister. Is this the ancient Middle East, or Sweet Home Alabama, am I right? The Pharaoh desired that sweet, sweet booty and drew Sarai into his harem in exchange for giving Abram a bunch of free stuff. But God struck Pharaoh and his house with plagues because he had lusted after the wife of his chosen one, and so Pharaoh had Abram and Sarai go away from him. So then Abram and his nephew Lot went to the south, and they got so much free livestock from the Pharaoh that they did not even have enough space to herd their livestock together. So Lot chose the plain of Jordan to live, while Abram continued to dwell in Canaan. God then promised Abram the land of Canaan for his descendants to hold on to forever, so Abram built an altar to the Lord to thank him. Then Lot got kidnapped when he got caught up in a war of kings involving many nations, because he was dwelling at Sodom at the time. So Abram went out with 318 men to slaughter the men who kidnapped Lot, and he brought him back, along with the people and loot that were stolen from Sodom. So the king Salem blessed Abram and gave him bread and wine, and the king of Sodom thanked Abram for defeating his enemies and bringing his people back. But Abram took none of the riches that the king of Sodom was offering, because he was a humble dude. Then the Lord came to Abram in a dream, saying that despite his wife's barrenness, he would have a biological son, and his descendants would be as many as the stars. So then Abram sacrificed God according to his instructions, and then God gave him a vision of the future and the Israelites staying in Egypt while he was sleeping. Then Sarai, Abram's wife, asked her Egyptian maidservant Hagar to have sex with her husband Abram to bear him a son, which she did. Hagar felt superior to Sarai since she gave Abram children and Sarai was not able to. So Sarai got jealous and kicked her to the curb. But the Lord sent an angel to her to tell her to return to her abusive master she was running from, and she birthed Ishmael to Abraham. Then God again told Abram that he would make a covenant with him, after which Abram fell on his face. For some reason, God changed his name to Abraham and changed Sarai's name to Sarah. I mean, it's not really that big of a difference. I don't see what's the need. And he told him that his wife would bear a son named Isaac to him. He then said that every male child of his descendants and his slaves had to have the tips of their penises cut off according to his covenant. Strange covenant. So Abraham did as God commanded and cut off all the penis tips of his house, including his own. He also told Abraham that he would bless his first son Ishmael. Then God and the 3 of his angels went to Abraham, and they ate with him in a picnic under a tree, because sometimes God has to relax a little. He can't spend all of his time butchering every single living thing on the face of the earth. I mean, come on. God once again reminded Abraham that Sarah would bear him a son, a suggestion Sarah laughed at, but God said that nothing was too hard for him to do, except for giving humanity without blood sacrifice, apparently. Then God decided that despite being omniscient, he still needed to go to see down to Sodom if it was as evil as people said, and if he needed to carry out a good old-fashioned genocide or not. But Abraham haggled with God and ended up convincing him to spare the city if he found at least 10 righteous people living in it. Then 2 angels came to Sodom to check out if there were any righteous people there, and they found Lot and ate with him. But their house was surrounded by depraved homosexuals who were thirsty for that sweet, sweet angel booty. They attempted to rape them, but Lot offered his virgin daughters to them instead. What a righteous man! But the perverts weren't having it, so the angels blinded them, and they told Lot to take his family out of Sodom, because God would soon destroy it due to the depravity taking place within. However, the Lord warned them not to look back at the city while it was being destroyed by fire and brimstone, and while fleeing, Lot's wife looked back at Sodom and Gomorrah, which was also being destroyed, I guess, and for some reason turned into a pillar of salt. Then Lot, wifeless, went to dwell in the mountains, and his 2 daughters realized that there were no men for them to have children with, so they had sex with their father after getting him drunk and bore his children, thus forming the Moabite and Ammon tribes. What a wholesome family values this good book has brought us. Then Abraham went to Gerar, and again told the king Abimelech there that Sarah was his sister, and he took her into his harem because she was hella fine. But God told King Abimelech the truth in a dream, and Abimelech was afraid of God because he threatened to kill him. So he gave Abraham his wife back and a bunch of servants and animals as compensation. God also made it so that the women of the house Abimelech were able to give birth again, because, oh yeah, he briefly made them all sterile for Abimelech's offense. Then God finally stopped screwing around and made Sarah conceive and bear a son, whom Abraham named Isaac. And Sarah told Abraham to throw Hagar and Ishmael out because the son of a slave could never be his rightful heir. The Lord backed her up on that, so Abraham sent them off with almost no food or water to the wilderness of Beersheba. They almost died after running out of water, but God saved them by creating a well, and said that he would create a great nation out of Ishmael. The kid eventually grew up to be an archer. Then Abraham made a covenant with Abimelech the Philistine at a water well for them not to screw with each other, and Abraham gave him some livestock in exchange for recognition that he was the one who dug the well. Then God told Abraham to bring his son Isaac to a mountain, kill him, and burn his body as a sacrifice. So Abraham obeyed and went up and bound his son and was about to kill him. But then the angel of the Lord stopped him at the last second, saying, "It was just a prank, bro. Relax." And God was satisfied, as he now knew that Abraham feared him more than he loved his own son. He was given a ram to sacrifice instead, which he did. God then rewarded Abraham's faithfulness again by stating that he would make a great nation from his descendants. And then Abraham returned to Beersheba. Then the Bible lists the sons born to Abraham's brother Nahor, and Sarah ended up dying at age 127, and Abraham buried her at a cave in Heth, in the field of Ephron, which cost him 400 shekels of silver. Then Abraham told his oldest servant to go fetch a wife for his son from the family of his brother Nahor, because he was too crusty and old to do it himself. And he told him that an angel of the Lord would guide him to the wife he was to get. He also made clear that his son was not to marry a filthy Canaanite. When the woman in the city of Nahor went out to draw water from the wells, the servant of Abraham tested the kindness of Rebekah, granddaughter of Nahor, by asking her to give him and his camels water. So she did, and then the servant offered her some bling as a reward. The servant asked for some lodging and was taken back to her house. He inquired about his mission that he was sent on by his master Abraham, and explained what happened on his journey there and how he tested Rebekah. Rebekah's parents, Laban and Bethuel, were willing to give Rebekah away, and so after the servant gave her family some more bling, Rebekah went with Abraham's servant to Canaan and became Isaac's wife, and comforted him after the loss of his mother. Then Abraham took another wife named Keturah and had 6 more children, which begs the question why it was even necessary to get God's help to conceive with Sarah in the first place. But he loved Isaac more than any of them, and he sent them away eastward with some gifts. And when he died at age 175, he was buried in a cave in the field of Ephron with Sarah by Isaac and Ishmael. Then the Bible lists all the descendants of Ishmael, with him living 137 years. I guess the ages are finally starting to go down. Then God blessed Isaac's wife Rebekah, who was previously barren, with twin brothers, one hairy beast named Esau, who Isaac loved as his eldest child, and a clingy one named Jacob, who Rebekah loved as her second son. One day, after coming back from hunting in the field, Esau sold Isaac his birthright for a bowl of soup, because you're not you when you're hungry. Then there was a famine in Canaan, and God told Isaac to go to Gerar in the territory of the Philistines. And then for the 3rd time in this damn book, Isaac pulled the trick of telling the people there that his wife was his sister, because he was afraid that they would kill him to get a piece of that sweet, sweet booty. When King Abimelech found out, he got embarrassed and told his men not to touch Rebekah under penalty of death. Then the Philistines got jealous of Isaac, who was making bank in Gerar and had a ton of livestock and servants. So they plugged up all his wells, so he dug more wells, but the herdsmen of Gerar claimed that the water in the wells belonged to them. So he left and dug a well for himself and named it Rehoboth. So then he made an altar to God at Beersheba, and then King Abimelech of the Philistines showed up and made an oath to Isaac that they would do each other no harm. Esau took 2 wives, and Isaac became blind in old age, and told Esau to go out and hunt game and come back with a savory meal so that he could give him his blessing. But Rebekah overheard, and had her favorite son Jacob prepare a savory meal for Isaac from the goats. He tricked his father into thinking he was Esau by masquerading as a hairy man, when in fact he was a smooth man, in order to get his brother's blessing. He was successful, despite his father noticing that he sounded like Jacob. Then Esau came back with his savory meal for his father, and he was pissed that his blessing has been given to his brother Jacob, and now he had nothing of his own and was to be subservient to Jacob. Esau hated Jacob with a burning passion and planned to kill him after Isaac died, but Rebekah told Jacob to flee to Laban to survive until his brother chilled the hell out. So then Isaac pulled Jacob in and told him to take a wife from the house of Laban, Rebekah's brother, but not from the filthy Canaanites, so he went out. Esau, not wanting to be overshadowed by his brother, also went out to take a wife named Mahalath, in addition to the 2 wives he already had. Then God came to Jacob in a dream while he was in Haran, and told him that he would make a great and numerous people from him, and he would protect him for the rest of his life. Then Jacob woke up and named the land he was staying at Bethel, and made a vow to serve the Lord God, who promised him he would protect him. Then he went to see his uncle Laban and asked those in the fields about him. Then Laban's daughter Rachel came out with her father's sheep, and Jacob told her who he was, after which she went and told her father. Jacob asked for his daughter Rachel's hand in marriage, and so after Jacob worked the fields for 7 years, he was given Laban's daughter and boned her in the night. But you see, it was a trick, and he was actually boning Leah, the older daughter, and somehow didn't realize it was her until morning. Jacob got pissed, but Laban ended up giving Rachel to him as well, so he could bone the daughter he really wanted, because it was tradition for him to give the oldest daughter first. Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah, and thus she felt unloved, so God heard her and allowed Leah to bear 4 sons for Jacob. And God also closed Rachel's womb. Rachel then became very jealous of Leah and had her maidservant have sex with Jacob to bear him 2 sons. And then Leah, not to be outdone, had her maidservant had sex with Jacob, and she bore him 2 sons. Then Leah bribed Rachel to have sex with Jacob again with mandrakes, and she bore him 2 more sons and a daughter. And then God, feeling like Rachel was being left out of the baby-making games, opened Rachel's womb, and she finally bore a son for Jacob. Family drama, am I right? Then Jacob made a deal with Laban that he would continue tending to his flocks if he was given all the speckled, spotted, and brown animals in his flock. And Laban agreed. However, Jacob gradually used a neat trick that is definitely a thing that happens, where he had the livestock copulate while looking at streaked rods, meaning the babies would be streaked, speckled, or spotted. Clearly, Jacob earned his biology degree from the highly esteemed AnswersInGenesis.com. He used this nifty trick to give himself all of the strong, healthy offspring of Laban's flock, and to leave Laban with all the weak and feeble livestock. Doesn't seem exactly fair. Jacob saw that Laban was angry, and the Lord told him to return to the land of Canaan. So he went with his family on camels, and Laban saw that he had left, and he was very angry, especially since his daughter Rachel had stolen all his idols. Laban eventually caught up to him at Mount Gilead and started yelling at him for running away with all his stuff, especially his idols. Jacob said he didn't take them, and Laban searched for them in the tents but couldn't find them because they were hidden under Rachel's thick ass, and her father would not approach her while she was menstruating. Then Jacob got super mad at him because he falsely accused him of stealing his idols, and he was also constantly changing his wages and treating him unfairly. I've been treated very unfairly, since he was really dedicated to being a field worker. Laban and Jacob made a covenant with one another after eating upon a heap, that they would burn the bridge and leave each other on equal terms. Jacob made a sacrifice to God, and in the morning Laban got up and left for his crib. Jacob was on his way back home and sent out messengers to his brother Esau to warn him of his impending arrival back home. And they came back to tell Jacob that Esau was coming with 400 men, so Jacob became afraid and split his company into two, so Esau couldn't slaughter everyone. He then prepared what livestock he possessed as a gift to his brother Esau to appease him. Later, in the middle of the night, he woke up and passed over Ford Jabbok with his family and left them over the brook. Then, when he was alone, a man decided to come and wrestle with him until morning. Little did he know that this wrestler was actually God himself in human form. I swear I'm not making this up, guys. Genesis 32, 24-32. Look it up. But apparently even God himself couldn't beat Jacob in a fair fight, so he dislocated Jacob's leg. But Jacob was a total beast, and he still wouldn't let God go until he blessed him. So God gave him a new name, Israel, for a prince who fought God and won. After Jacob realized that God's a part-time wrestler, he was shocked, though honestly I think it explains a lot. So after that whole ordeal, no Israelite ever ate the hip muscle because Jacob gave out on him. I call that sound logic, don't you? When Esau came to Jacob, he was actually super chill and embraced his brother, and Jacob in turn gave him shares of his livestock. Later, Esau journeyed to Seir, and Jacob journeyed to Succoth, and then went to the city of Shechem in Canaan and erected an altar to God there. Dinah, the daughter of Leah, caught the eye of Shechem, and the prince of the country, and he took her and had sex with her, and told his father Hamor that he wanted her as a wife. But Jacob was angry that his daughter had been defiled, and his sons were angry too. And so when Hamor went out to speak with Israel about a marriage uniting their two families, Israel's sons told Shechem that he could have Dinah if all of the males of the city were circumcised. And Shechem was really horny, so he had his father have all the males of the city circumcised. But while they were still reeling from the pain, Israel's sons, Simeon and Levi, killed every single male in the city, and then all the sons of Israel sacked the city and took everything from them, including their livestock, wealth, women, and children. You know, they say you never forget your first, and killing the entire male population of a city by tricking them into cutting off their own foreskins certainly leaves a memorable first impression as far as stories of God's chosen people committing mass slaughter go. Israel scolded them for doing so, but saw it as more of a slap on the wrist kind of thing and didn't actually punch them at all. Then God told Israel to go to Bethel and make an altar to him. So Israel gathered all his people, and after getting rid of all their idols, went out. And then after he got there, God changed his name to Israel officially. I mean, I thought he already did that after Jacob beat the omnipotent creator of the universe in a wrestling match, but whatever. And promised him that the nation that spawned from his body would be one of kings. Jacob then named the place Bethel. Wait, didn't he already do that in an earlier chapter? And then Rachel died in childbirth, pumping out another son. And so Israel now had 12 sons, and after Israel returned to his father Isaac, he died at the age of 180 and was buried by his sons. So after Esau's genealogy is listed out by the Bible, Esau took his wives and children and cattle out of Canaan because for some reason there wasn't enough space there for him to live with his brother. And then he went to Mount Seir, and then the Bible lists more of his genealogies for like a whole chapter. Esau's people went on to become the Edomites, and they were a kingdom long before Israel was. Israel loved his son Joseph more than any of his other sons and gifted him a coat of many colors, and his brothers absolutely despised him. Joseph had a dream prophesying that all of his brothers would one day bow down to him, so his brothers hated him even more than they already did and conspired to kill him. Joseph was sent by his father to Shechem to bring word back from his brothers, and he found them in Dothan. His brothers were planning to kill him, but one of them, named Reuben, whose brain was still in recovery mode from so many high-level ideas, convinced them not to. So they stripped him of his tunic, shoved him in a hole, and sold him to a company of merchants from Gilead, who were on their way to Egypt. Israel mourned his son's death after being brought back a bloody cloak, while Joseph was sold to officer Potiphar of Pharaoh. Forget that, though, because it's time for a filler story. Judah, son of Israel, was feeling horny one day and decided to knock up a Canaanite woman named Shua and had 3 sons with her. He took a wife, Tamar, for his firstborn son, Er, but God killed him because he didn't like him, for reasons we do not fully understand. So then Judah's second son, Onan, was to marry Tamar and have her bear children for his brother, but he pulled a pull-out on her because he knew her children would be his brothers, which God didn't like, so he killed him, and Tamar remained a widow until Judah's third son was of age. But Judah never gave his son to her because he was too busy sheep herding after his wife died. So she dressed up as a prostitute by the side of the road, and Judah was feeling lonely since his wife had died, so he had sex with her, pledging to give her a kid from his flock. And bada bing, bada boom, she was now bearing his child. Judah then went back to give her the kid, but she wasn't there, so good on him, he got to keep the goat. Despite shacking up with what he thought was a whore himself, Judah was totally ready to burn Tamar at the stake when he found out she was preggers, but she proved to him that he was the one that she had sex with by presenting the signet, cord, and staff that he gave her as a pledge. So Judah was totally embarrassed and did not burn her at the stake, and she gave birth to twins. What a heartwarming story! They must tell it all the time in Sunday school. Meanwhile, back at the plot, Joseph had been sold to Potiphar, the captain of the guards in Egypt, but the Lord was with him. So Potiphar favored him and made him overseer of his house, and the Lord blessed him with success. However, Potiphar's wife became attracted to Joseph and wanted to sleep with him, but he would not give in. So she lied to her husband out of pettiness and said that Joseph had already tried to sleep with her to punish Joseph, and so Potiphar put him in prison. But God was with Joseph, and he did some ladder climbing and became the keeper of the prison. Then a butler and a baker of Pharaoh got thrown into jail for offending him, and both had dreams, but they were sad because there was no one around to interpret them. Joseph said that he could interpret them with God's help, so he did, and prophesied that the chief butler would be renewed to his place serving the Pharaoh, while the chief baker would be killed and hanged on a tree, and both predictions came true. So then, after 2 years or so, Pharaoh had some pretty disturbing dreams himself about bad food eating good food, and no one could interpret them. So the chief butler remembered how Joseph interpreted his dreams and suggested that Pharaoh should use his skills. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph from the prison and told him of his dreams. Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dreams as that there would be 7 years of plentiful food in Egypt, but then God would cast a famine over the land for 7 more years and there would be no more food. So Pharaoh was impressed and decided to leave Joseph in charge of gathering up portions of food in Egypt during the good years in order to prepare for the hard times to come, and somehow none of it went bad. So Joseph essentially became Pharaoh's second in command and became very powerful in Egypt and ruled over the land in Pharaoh's stead. Joseph then acquired a wife and children, and the food storage was going pretty smoothly. After the 7 good years had passed, a bunch of refugees were pouring into Egypt because the famine was somehow taking place over the entire world. Really, Pharaoh, don't you know that if you let the starving immigrants in, they'll just leech off of welfare checks? Damn socialist. Israel sent his sons to Egypt to buy grain because of the famine, but his youngest son Benjamin stayed with him. So, for some reason, Joseph's brothers were selected to meet him in person, despite the fact that he was second only to the Pharaoh and probably wouldn't have had the time. And Joseph recognized them, but since he was salty for, them selling him into slavery, he pretended that he wasn't their brother. For lulz, Joseph claimed that they were spies and wanted to see the land naked. Damn perverts. And he threatened to kill them if they did not bring their youngest brother to him. And he also locked his brother Simeon up as insurance in Egypt. But he also gave them food and their money back, so good deal, I think. Then Joseph's brothers returned to tell Israel what happened, and after they did, Israel was super sad about losing Simeon, and told his sons not to go back to get Simeon, or else they might die as well. Joseph surely could have avoided this situation if he had just told his brothers who he was, but we need to stretch this story arc out somehow. After Joseph's brothers had eaten all of the grain, though, out of desperation, Israel commanded them to go back to Egypt to get more food. So they took Benjamin with them, and Judah swore to his father that he would not let him die. So they took more money and the money they were given back by Joseph, and somehow fine fruits and spices that they had, even though there was a disastrous famine, to give to Joseph as a gift, and they returned to Egypt. When Joseph saw them, he invited them into his crib and had a meal prepared for them and released Simeon. They gave him their offerings, and Joseph wept when he saw his brother Benjamin. And they all had a great feast together, but Joseph still did not tell them who he was and wanted to keep this April Fool's prank going as long as possible. So then Joseph sent his brothers away and told his steward to fill his brothers' sacks with food and money, and Benjamin's sack was to have his silver chalice. And then he told his steward to go up and catch up to his brothers, who had left him, and told him to frame Benjamin for stealing his chalice for the lulz. So the brothers were brought back to Egypt, and just to troll them, Joseph said that he would take Benjamin as his slave. But Judah explained to Joseph that his father would literally die if Benjamin did not return to him, so he offered himself up as a slave for Joseph in place of Benjamin. So finally, Joseph couldn't keep up the charade any longer. Kind of begs the question why he started the whole farce in the first place, and confessed his identity to his brothers and said that he was not angry at them for his betrayal, because it was all God's plan and he made him the hero of Egypt, which means that God created a 7-year horrible famine across the entire earth, which probably killed millions of people just so that Joseph could become rich and powerful. He told them to go back to Canaan and tell their father that he was alive, and that they should come with him to dwell in the land of Goshen in Egypt. He then embraced his brothers and told them everything they needed would be provided for them in Egypt, and was backed up by the Pharaoh on that. So they were sent away with many provisions and pack animals, and they told their father of what they had seen, and Israel had his spirit rejuvenated after he realized that Joseph was alive, and he decided he had to see him again before he died. Then Israel made a sacrifice to God at Beersheba, and God said that he was totally cool with Israel going down to Egypt. So he headed off to Goshen with all his family, every member of which was meticulously listed in the chapter. They made it to the land of Goshen, and Israel met his son Joseph and cried and was fulfilled. So Joseph presented his brothers and father to Pharaoh, and he agreed to give them the best land to dwell in to work as shepherds. Israel blessed Pharaoh for his kindness, but the famine got worse, so after Joseph had already taken all the people's money in exchange for food, he then took their livestock and their land in exchange for food, and made it so that a 1/5 tax had to be given to Pharaoh of whatever they produced. So yeah, Pharaoh was pretty much wealthy enough to just buy all the things at this point. Israel's family was growing prosperous in Egypt, but by the age of 147, Israel was dying, and made Joseph promise him that he would bury him in a place out of Egypt alongside his ancestors, and Joseph swore on his father's nutsack that he would do so. Israel then told Joseph of his encounter with God in the land of Canaan, and how God told him that a great nation was to be made of his descendants. Then he went and blessed Joseph's sons, and said that his younger son Ephraim would be greater than his firstborn son Manasseh, and it was his seed that would form a great nation. Then Jacob said his last words to all of his 12 sons before dying. He told Reuben that he would never be great because he had sex with his wife, called Simeon and Levi cruel beasts, called Judah a lion's whelp, told Zebulun he would dwell by the sea, called Issachar a strong donkey, told Dan he was a serpent, told Gad he would overcome some troops, told Asher he would yield royal dainties. He complimented Naphtali's vocabulary, called Benjamin a ravenous beast, and complimented Joseph on his strong arms. When I die, I want to go out with an epic dinner roast like that. He pronounced that their descendants would one day become the 12 tribes of Israel and were blessed by God, and also said that Joseph was special and different from his brothers. I smell favoritism. Then Jacob asked his sons to bury him in the cave that his forefathers were buried in. So after he was done mourning for his father's death, Joseph asked Pharaoh if he could bring his father's corpse to bury it in the grave of his forefathers, and Pharaoh agreed. So Joseph and his brothers did so, and they mourned him for 7 days there. Joseph and his brothers returned to Egypt, and Joseph officially forgave them for selling him into slavery, since it was all God's plan and such. Later, Joseph died at 110 years old, but before he did, he prophesied that God would bring them out of the land of Egypt eventually, to bring them into the promised land of their ancestors. The end.